A year ago, America fell in love with a singing janitor from Terre Haute.
Oh, Richard Goodall won, you might remember, America's Got Talent.
What if I told you that one of the most inspiring winners in talent show history almost gave up on music completely? Before the standing ovations, the golden buzzer, and the $1 million prize, Richard Goodall was simply a middle school janitor singing while wiping cafeteria tables.
And what do you do for a living?
I've been a janitor for 23 years. The kids call me Mr. Richard.
But hidden behind that viral moment was a story filled with heartbreak, rejection, loss, and a family mystery that remained unsolved for more than 50 years. Today, we're uncovering the incredible truth behind Richard Goodall's rise to fame, the devastating tragedy that shaped his voice, and the emotional decision that finally changed his life forever.
Richard Goodall, winner of AGT 2024, and you have just been buzzed.
Don't miss this unbelievable journey. Why he went back to mopping floors. After winning America's Got Talent, most people assumed Richard Goodall would immediately walk away from his custodial job and begin a full-time music career. The confetti had fallen, the $1 million prize had been awarded, and his name was suddenly known across the country. To many fans, it seemed obvious that his days of mopping floors and cleaning classrooms were over. But they were wrong. When the television cameras stopped rolling and the excitement of the finale faded, Richard returned to West Vigo Middle School and went back to work just as he had for more than 2 decades. He cleaned hallways, wiped down cafeteria tables, and greeted students each morning with the same warmth that had made him beloved long before he became famous. When reporters asked why he hadn't left immediately, Richard gave a surprisingly simple answer. He genuinely loved the students, the teachers, and the staff. More importantly, he loved the sense of purpose and routine the job had provided for over 20 years. Fame had changed many things, but it had not changed who he was. His hometown of Terre Haute, Indiana, embraced him as a local hero. The city awarded him a key to the city, and West Vigo Middle School organized an emotional pep rally in his honor. Students cheered wildly, teachers wiped away tears, and local news stations covered the celebration as if it were a parade for a hometown champion rather than a school assembly. What many people didn't realize was that Terre Haute had supported Richard long before America's Got Talent ever entered the picture. When he first needed to travel to Los Angeles for the competition, it wasn't a sponsor or a record company that paid the expenses. Friends, neighbors, former classmates, and local supporters raised money themselves to help him get there. His success was never just his own. It belonged to an entire community that believed in him before the rest of America did. Even after becoming nationally known, Richard remained remarkably grounded. New opportunities continued to appear. He performed the national anthem at an Indiana Pacers game, opened a show for Howie Mandel, and appeared at major local events such as the Circle of Lights and the Riverside Festival of Lights. Yet despite the growing list of performances and public appearances, he still showed up at school many mornings ready to work. Co-workers eventually stopped treating him like a celebrity, something Richard considered a blessing. Seeing him in the hallway every day made the fame feel less like a spotlight and more like a normal part of life. Rather than rushing into a major record deal, he chose to build his music career slowly and carefully. On August 29, 2025, he released his debut single, Long Time Coming, recorded in Nashville with professional producers. The title perfectly reflected his journey, from singing in small churches, karaoke bars, and school cafeterias, to finally releasing original music after decades of waiting. He also joined a local group called Sugar Street, performing smaller shows that allowed him to grow as an artist without the pressure of national television expectations. Then came a remarkable full-circle moment. In August 2025, Richard returned to the America's Got Talent stage for the show's 20th anniversary special, performing Eye of the Tiger. Later, during the season 20 finale, he performed Long Time Coming alongside Journey guitarist Neil Schon, a surreal moment considering that Don't Stop Believin' by Journey had started his entire viral journey. Backstage, Richard watched his original audition clip again and admitted that it affected him more than he expected. The nervous janitor who had stepped onto that stage seemed like a completely different person. Still, one enormous decision remained ahead of him. For years, Richard had balanced two worlds, one behind a mop and one behind a microphone. Eventually, he knew that balance could not last forever. The goodbye that changed everything. By late 2025, Richard Goodall had started speaking much more seriously about the future. What had begun as an unexpected opportunity after America's Got Talent was no longer just a temporary moment of fame connected to a reality show. Music was becoming a genuine career, and for the first time in his life, he had to consider what it would mean to fully step into that new identity. One of the clearest signs of that transition came when he headlined the Vigo County YMCA Inspiration Gala in Terre Haute. During the event, he performed both his debut single, Long Time Coming, and the Journey anthem, Don't Stop Believin', the very song that had launched his remarkable journey from school janitor to national star. The gala raised money for local scholarships, giving Richard an opportunity to give back to the community that had supported him long before television audiences knew his name. As his music career continued to grow, new possibilities began appearing, almost faster than he could process them. Conversations started about a potential full-length album, a possible collaboration with Simon Cowell, and even a book deal that would tell the story of his extraordinary rise from custodial work to national recognition. Around the same time, his wife Angie revealed that Hollywood producers had expressed interest in turning Richard's life into a feature film. Richard usually laughed when people asked who should play him in a movie, but the idea was beginning to feel less like a joke and more like a genuine possibility. Despite all the attention and new opportunities, Richard remained deeply connected to Terre Haute. On social media, he continued sharing ordinary moments from his daily life, reminding fans that he still considered himself the same humble man they had first discovered singing in a school cafeteria. That grounded attitude became one of the reasons so many people continued to relate to him, even as his fame grew. Then, in the summer of 2026, Richard made the announcement that truly marked the end of an era. After 25 years of service, he officially retired from the Vigo County School Corporation. He later admitted that the decision was far more emotional than he had expected. Walking those familiar hallways for the last time was incredibly difficult. The quiet early mornings before students arrived had always brought him a sense of peace, and leaving behind that routine felt like leaving behind a significant part of his identity. He also spoke with refreshing honesty about the fear involved. Entertainment, he acknowledged, is far less predictable than a steady paycheck. For someone who had spent decades working hard, paying bills, and living responsibly, stepping away from a secure job to pursue music full-time was genuinely frightening. Teachers, custodians, students, and staff members gathered to celebrate his final days at the school. For them, it felt like saying goodbye to far more than an employee. Richard had become a friend, a mentor, and a symbol of kindness and perseverance within their community. As if that retirement were not significant enough, another stunning announcement soon followed. Richard signed a deal with Everard Entertainment and Mad Chance Productions to develop a feature film based on his life story, with writer Chris Parizzo attached to the project. Producers pointed to the extraordinary combination of events that made his story so compelling. A viral cafeteria video, a golden buzzer on national television, the heartbreaking loss of his first wife, a second chance at love with Angie, the discovery of a biological father and 3 siblings after 55 years, and the unlikely transformation of a humble school janitor into a national inspiration. They called it a modern version of the American dream. Richard's response remained characteristically modest. He insisted that he was still just a regular guy who happened to get the chance of a lifetime. Perhaps that humility is exactly why his story resonates so deeply. He did not become famous because he aggressively chased celebrity. He became famous because he kept singing when nobody seemed to notice, kept working after rejection, kept showing up after heartbreak, and kept believing that ordinary people are still capable of extraordinary things. A middle school janitor humming Journey songs while cleaning cafeteria tables could never have imagined that one day he would win America's Got Talent, discover a hidden family, release original music, retire after 25 years of service, and sign a Hollywood film deal. Yet somehow, every one of those seemingly impossible pieces became part of Richard Goodall's real story. The janitor who shocked America. Richard Goodall never looked like someone destined for national television. Born in Indianapolis and raised in Terre Haute, Indiana, he lived a quiet and predictable life built around family, work, and community. For more than 2 decades, he worked as a custodian for the Vigo County School Corporation, eventually becoming a familiar face at West Vigo Middle School. Students knew him as the friendly janitor who greeted them every morning and sang classic rock songs while cleaning the cafeteria. To most people, he was simply part of the school's daily routine, but music had always been much more than a hobby. Long before America heard his voice, Richard sang in church choirs, performed karaoke with friends, and spent years singing in gospel trios around Indiana. Friends often wondered why someone with such a powerful voice never pursued a professional music career. Richard himself never expected that dream to become reality. Everything changed in 2022. One afternoon, while cleaning the cafeteria, Richard began singing "Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. A student secretly recorded the performance and uploaded it online. By the next morning, the video had exploded across social media. Thousands of strangers were suddenly talking about the singing janitor from Indiana. Local news stations picked up the story, and national outlets soon followed. Comment sections filled with praise from people who were stunned that a school custodian possessed a voice capable of filling an arena. Even Howie Mandel noticed the clip and publicly suggested that Richard belonged on a much bigger stage. What made the story even more remarkable was Richard's reaction. He didn't quit his job. He didn't hire a manager. He simply returned to work the next day wearing the same custodial uniform and cleaning the same hallways he had cleaned for years. Few people knew that this wasn't his first attempt to be discovered. At some point before the viral video, Richard had auditioned for The Voice. Nothing came of it. He received no callback, no opportunity, and no explanation. Like countless dreamers before him, he quietly accepted the rejection and returned to his ordinary life. Then, 2 years after the cafeteria video went viral, something extraordinary happened. Producers from America's Got Talent contacted him. In May 2024, Richard boarded an airplane for the very first time in his life and flew to Los Angeles. He had never traveled west of the Missouri River, making the trip feel overwhelming and surreal. When he walked onto the AGT stage, his nerves were obvious. But the moment the music started, everything changed. His performance of "Don't Stop Believin' electrified the audience. Judge Heidi Klum was so moved that she slammed the golden buzzer, sending him straight to the live shows. Confetti rained down as Richard stood on stage in complete disbelief. Simon Cowell later called it one of his favorite auditions in the show's history. From that moment forward, Richard treated every performance as a gift rather than a competition. He sang "How Am I Supposed to Live Without You" as a tribute to someone very special, delivered an energetic "Eye of the Tiger" in the semi-finals, and closed the finale with an emotional rendition of "Faithfully." When the season ended, Richard Goodall was crowned the winner of America's Got Talent Season 19. At 55 years old, he became the oldest winner in the show's history and the first singer to win the competition in 5 years. For television viewers, it looked like a perfect fairy tale ending. But the truth was that Richard's greatest battles had happened long before he ever stepped onto that stage. The heartbreak that shaped his voice. Fame arrived suddenly, but pain had been building quietly for years. After the disappointment of The Voice, Richard found comfort in a small gospel band. Traveling and singing with that group gave him a sense of purpose that balanced the monotony of custodial work. Music became the place where he felt most understood. Then the pandemic arrived. Almost overnight, performances stopped. Churches closed, venues shut down, and gatherings were cancelled. The gospel group eventually fell apart, taking with it one of the few creative outlets that had sustained Richard through years of disappointment. But an even greater tragedy was waiting. In 2021, Richard lost his first wife, Patricia Sue, to kidney cancer. Her death shattered the life they had built together. Patricia had stood beside him through decades of hard work, financial uncertainty, and musical dreams that never seemed to go anywhere. Losing her left him facing a silence that felt impossible to escape. Friends later said they could hear the grief in his voice whenever he sang after her passing. Richard continued showing up to work each morning because that was simply who he was. He cleaned classrooms, waxed floors, and greeted students with a smile, even while privately struggling to rebuild a life that no longer felt familiar. That sorrow became part of his music. When millions of viewers watched him sing emotional ballads on America's Got Talent, many were moved by the depth of feeling in his performances without realizing that the emotion came from very real loss. For a long time, it seemed as though grief would define the rest of his life. Then, unexpectedly, love returned. In 2022, Richard met a woman named Angie. Unlike the strangers who would later know him as a viral sensation, Angie knew him simply as Richard, the kind, humble janitor from Terre Haute who loved to sing. As their relationship grew, Angie became the steady presence he desperately needed. She encouraged him during moments of doubt and reminded him that his talent mattered, even when he struggled to believe it himself. During the whirlwind of America's Got Talent, Angie remained by his side through rehearsals, travel, interviews, and the overwhelming pressure of national attention. Then, just days before the AGT finale, the couple made a deeply personal decision. They quietly got married in California. There were no television cameras, no elaborate publicity announcements, and no reality show spectacle. Family members and close friends from Richard's AGT journey attended the small ceremony, and afterward, the newlyweds shared a quiet dinner on the beach. While viewers were focused on the upcoming finale, Richard was privately beginning an entirely new chapter of his life. He later credited Angie as one of the biggest reasons he found the courage to keep pushing forward through every round of the competition. But Angie's influence on his life was about to extend far beyond emotional support. She encouraged him to confront a mystery he had carried since childhood, the identity of his biological father. Richard had been adopted as an infant, and for most of his life he had accepted that he might never know where half of his story came from. The unanswered questions had become something he simply learned to live with. Angie convinced him that it was worth searching. Neither of them could have imagined what they were about to discover. The family secret he never expected to uncover. Using an ancestry service, Richard and Angie began tracing his biological roots. What started as a simple search quickly turned into one of the most emotional experiences of his life. They eventually located a man named Hubert, a retired K-9 police officer and Army veteran living in Indiana. The most shocking part, Hubert had no idea Richard existed. For more than 5 decades, both men had lived separate lives without knowing they were connected. But the story became even stranger when they finally made contact. According to Richard, his biological father recognized him first. Hubert had been watching America's Got Talent and had seen the now famous singing janitor on television. Something about Richard's face made him suspect a connection. When they finally spoke, Hubert reportedly asked if he was the janitor guy from the singing competition. Imagine discovering that your biological father recognized you from national television before either of you knew you were related. The reunion revealed even more surprises. Richard learned that he had 3 siblings he had never met and never even knew existed. In an instant, a man who had grown up with unanswered questions about his identity suddenly found himself connected to an entirely new branch of family. Richard later shared the news publicly on social media, introducing his biological father to fans and thanking Angie for encouraging him to search in the first place. He admitted that without her support, he probably would have left that chapter of his life closed forever. For years, he had made peace with not knowing. Meeting Hubert did not erase the life he had lived as an adopted child, but it gave him something he had stopped expecting to find: a living connection to the other half of his history. He described the experience as one of the most meaningful surprises of his entire life. Suddenly, Richard's story was no longer just about a janitor who could sing. It was about a man who had endured rejection, survived devastating loss, found love again, and uncovered a hidden family after 55 years of uncertainty. And yet, despite all of these life-changing revelations, Richard still wasn't ready to abandon the job that had defined most of his adult life. Richard Goodall's journey reminds us that dreams do not expire with age, and ordinary people often carry extraordinary gifts hidden beneath everyday routines. From cleaning school hallways to standing under the brightest lights in television, he proved that persistence, humility, and hope can change a life in ways nobody could predict. His story is about far more than singing. It is about surviving heartbreak, embracing new love, discovering family, and finally choosing to believe in himself completely. If this incredible true story inspired you, please like and subscribe for more uplifting stories, hidden truths, and unforgettable journeys that deserve to be heard.